So this dude's girlfriend surprises him at a New Year's Eve party that he's under the impression that she won't be able to attend due to work obligations. And his reaction unintentionally turned him into the new couch guy, if you remember that. And rather than speculating on them, because I think we've had more than enough of that, I wanted to shed some light on a frustration that a lot of people seem to have in the comments, which came after she posted the video. As you can imagine, the comments came rolling in telling her she should run. But after disagreeing with people's takes, she posted this video to prove that it wasn't like that. Yeah, it didn't help. And there's where the question came from, which was people basically saying, why is advice so often ignored until it's too late? Everything I say from this point forward has nothing to do with the two of them. I just want to show you an unlikely illustration of why this happens and how to handle it if the person who's ignoring your advice is somebody you love. You will not believe until you see it for yourself how this is illustrated to a T in the second season of Squid Game. Again, this is about the question, not them specifically. In this show, people who are either in crippling debt or severely impoverished are preyed upon and lured into a game where they could potentially win a lot of money. What they're not told is that it's a unaliving game, where if you lose, your free trial of life is ended. Light spoilers for season 2 if you haven't seen it, so click away if you need to. In the first season, our main character went through this game and won. But afterwards, the survivor's guilt combined with some anger towards the organization who sets the whole thing up made him want to use the money to put an end to the game as a whole. Well, the plot does plot things, and in season 2, he ends up having to play the game again, with a whole new set of people. Well, fast forward and they're about to play the first game, and it turns out they're playing red light, green light for their first one, a game he already played once. So he knows the ins and outs, but more importantly, he knows that if you lose, you're unalived. Now remember his mission, which is to end these games and to save as many people as possible. So when the game starts, he starts giving everybody the sauce, life-saving advice that they certainly need. But to his surprise, when he starts dropping knowledge on them, people not only don't believe him, but they start disrespecting him. Because they haven't been through this yet, they're like, we're gonna get clapped playing red light, green light. Oh, this guy must be drunk. And then someone else says he's just lying so he can increase his chance of winning. So what does he do in response? I want you to remember this because it's going to come back in a minute. He doesn't get his feelings hurt and he doesn't argue. He just calmly says, when it starts, no matter what happens, do not panic. Don't start running. And again, everyone's just like, whatever, dude. So the game starts and he continues to give them instruction. And aside from a select few, people are largely ignoring him. And for a minute, it looks like they're going to be okay. But then something happens. While waiting for a red light to pass, a bee lands on this girl's neck. When she freaks out to get it off, she's like, oh man, I lost. But I mean, hey, it's just red light, green light, right? This development has the effect you would imagine on many of the players, and a bunch of people take off running. Then they just start dropping like flies. While to those who hear him, he shouts, don't move. Then the robot goes, green light, and everyone who survived is too terrified to move. And this next part made me tear up when I first watched it. Because despite how they treated him, when he was trying to explain and they wouldn't take him seriously, and everyone's standing there frozen in fear. During the next green light, you see a small motion breaking through the crowd. And after he covers his mouth to avoid detection from the motion sensor, he says if you don't cross the finish line in time, they will still make you a live junior. The sensor cannot detect your movement if you're behind someone larger than you. So form lines and get moving. And what do you think happened next? Keep in mind how they responded to his advice the first time. But what changed, do you think? He's the same guy as before. He hasn't changed. They have. So why does well-meaning advice so often fall on deaf ears? Because the lips of wisdom are closed, but to the ears of understanding. You're usually speaking from experience, but the advisee just has to believe you, basically. I know this seems way too heavy compared to the situation that started this conversation, but it's an angle that a metric most people miss when it comes to advising others. Because most people, when someone doesn't take their advice, they take it personally and then revel in the person's failure and suffering if it comes. Which is fine if that's working for you. But for the rest of us, what do you do if it's somebody you love? Someone you genuinely want the best for? What do we do when it's that person? Exactly what Song does here. He initially gives them the advice when they need it, but when it's ignored or shrugged off, he doesn't take it personally. He doesn't waste time arguing, he just gives them the advice they need and lets reality proceed. Then once they hit the wall and things fall apart, then when they're in the pits, without ridicule, he steps forward and offers them advice again. This time speaking to the ears of understanding. My little brother asks me for advice all the time, and as a teenager, he often does not take it. And more than once, he's asked me, how did you know that was going to happen? And I tell him, because I did the same thing. Then he'll be like, why didn't you try harder to stop me then? Because not all advice is designed to stop you from making the mistake. Some advice is to hasten the learning process when you do. Most of all the wisdom I hold dear came from my most painful mistakes. Why would I rob you of that? A common thing I tell him every time he asks me for advice, I'll give him my take, then I'll say, but do what you want. I'll love you either way. When stepping into the role of a mentor or an advisor, you gotta understand that them not listening is a normal part of the process, and that your job with non-life threatening things is simply to